Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of JavaScript Jabber. My name is Steve Edwards, coming from a very frigid Portland, Oregon. And with me today, I have Maximiliano, I guess you go by Max, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Firtman, he's coming to us from Buenos Ares, Argentina. So Max, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. So yeah, I can go by Max. I'm a mobile web developer. That's how I define myself today. I've been doing web development for 20-something years, 24. Then I started doing mobile around 2001. So before the iPhone, before the Android. In the middle, I've been doing a lot of workshops, trainings. I author a couple of books, mostly on mobile and web, both technologies. These days, I'm more focused on PWAs, progressive web apps, as well as web performance.
When I'm building a new product, G2I is the company that I call on to help me find a developer who can build the first version. G2I is a hiring platform run by engineers that matches you with React, React Native, GraphQL, and mobile engineers who you can trust. Whether you are a new company building your first product or an established company that wants additional engineering help, G2I has the talent you need to accomplish your goals. Go to devchat.tv/G2I to learn more about what G2I has to offer. In my experience, G2I is linked up with experienced developers that can fit my budget, and the G2I staff are friendly and easy to work with. They know how product development works and can help you find the perfect engineer for your stack. Go to devchat.tv/G2I to learn more about G2I.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit. You said you've been doing this for about 24 years. So if you're like me, that means you started doing web development when the first tools, you're either handwriting, HTML, and CSS, or maybe you were using tools like Microsoft Front Page or Dreamweaver. What were you using when you started out?
So when I started, I was using Edit from MS-DOS. Okay, that was my first website. Windows 3.1, I think. I didn't have Windows 95 yet. So then, yes, I moved into Front Page. But my first websites were pure HTML. There were no CSS at the time. And yeah, then I moved into Front Page 98, I think. And then I was a Dreamweaver user for a couple of years before going back to a simple editor.
So what was your first scripting language? Was it ASP?
Yeah, it was ASP, the classic ASP before PHP. But yeah, ASP, I think I did something on Perl before that. But most of the time it was ASP.
ASP, yeah.
I think about 98 probably. That was.
Yeah, where I started was 98 with Front Page, and I went down the PHP route on MySQL, and I can remember doing my first website in straight HTML, just using JavaScript goodies or HTML goodies, and using the web space provided by my hosting provider, which was AT&T Broadband at the time.
My first two websites were hosted in GeoCities. So.
Oh, there you go. That's old school for those of us who remember GeoCities. Okay, so you started doing web development, and then when did you start doing it, say, professionally? Or
I think it was immediately because I started doing HTML. Before that, I was doing some Clipper apps, like some software for MS-DOS. But I started professionally doing web pretty fast. I think it was my third website, was the first one I started to receive some money from it. So it's probably 1997 or 96, something like that. And yeah, here I am still working on the same HTML language.
Exactly. I can remember when the internet first started coming out, like 92, 93, I think. I remember using my friend's dial-up connection, taking let's download a photo, and he's yelling at me because I'm using up all his hours. And so you started getting into mobile. So I remember the first iPhone coming out around 2008, somewhere around there, if I remember right. Yeah. I just remember where
it was 2007 was the first one. I started 6 years before that. So I started with WML. So it was and WML and WML script. So they were for websites for web pages. Then I moved into J2ME, to Java Micro Edition. Then I did BlackBerry, Symbian, and many other platforms before the iPhone and Android. But yeah, iPhone started in 2007. And then we started seeing Android in the market as well.
Right. Okay. So mobile development. So what have you worked on over the years with the mobile development? Were you just basically doing websites that you could see on a phone? And what was the progression from doing that into doing mobile-specific apps like we see today?
I like to see that I always try to offer services or products over mobile. And then the technology that I was using might be different. So sometimes it was a website or web-based technology. Sometimes it was native. So I've been working from probably 15 SDKs for doing native as well. But I always try to bring the web into the mobile space. So I always like the idea of the web, the open web, and bringing that into the mobile space. So yeah, I did PhoneGap. Before that, I did some other web solutions available for some platforms like BlackBerry. These days, it's mostly about PWAs or progressive web apps, but I'm also doing workshops and delivering trainings on native technology. Next week, I'm traveling to the Bay Area to deliver a training for a company, and it will be Swift and Objective-C. So I'm also a native developer, but part of my heart is with the web. So I always try to bring the web into the mobile space.
Okay, yeah. So going back a little bit, I can recall I was doing a Drupal development for a number of years, if people have heard me mention. And when I first started getting to mobile development, or when sites that I was working on needed to do that, the way we did it was separate themes. So you had one for desktop, and then you'd create a whole separate theme for mobile that was designed differently, and so on. So you're basically maintaining two things for two different presentations for the same content. And then you started getting things like Bootstrap. I believe that was what the first sort of framework that came out. It was initially Twitter Bootstrap that was designed to accommodate for you, whether you were on a desktop and then a mobile. Is that your recollection in terms of the progression?
So yeah, I have other things before that. So I think if you remember, the first thing was a mobile version of the website that was completely in a different language. That was WML. After that, we had the first iPhone. With the first iPhone, we started to support the desktop web on mobile. So it was the first time you can actually render a desktop website on a mobile device. And then we had the pinch gesture to zoom in. Then we moved into this idea that, maybe we need to do something special. And we had the mobile that usually so m.cnn.com, like a separate HTML version. And then responsive web design appeared. Right. That's what you are saying. So the idea that one code can serve different platforms. The problem was that we didn't realize that responsive web design had a very high cost in web performance for mobile devices. So then that's why after a while, we started to see different approaches, not just responsive web design.
Okay, so the cost was in what? The extra JavaScript or the extra code that was needed to handle the responsive changes?
Yeah, it's JavaScript, but it's also CSS and resources. So just to give you a node idea, but if you have different CSS files, even with a media query, the browser needs to download all the CSS files, even if the media query is false. Regarding web performance, the browser will not render any pixel on the screen, at least at the time, if all the CSS was not downloaded and parsed. So talking about mobile phones and cellular networks and probably slow 3G networks at the time, that was a problem because then the mobile phone needed to download and parse a lot of CSS that we'll never use. And that led to some performance issues on mobile devices and conversion problems. That's why a lot of big companies had to move back to the M.dot version at the time because they were having money problems. So they were having less users, less visits, because basically people were not waiting for the page to load.
I mean, that's still a problem. Anytime I hear a discussion about developing for mobile and performance, you mean places like maybe if I'm sitting here, on my desktop with my powerful iMac and, nice speeds, and something's going to be pretty quick for me, or on a phone, on a new Android or Samsung or iPhone or whatever. But in a lot of other parts of the world, maybe you have older phones and you've got slower downloads. And so it's always an issue of dealing with performance if you want your customers to be able to see your site.
So there are a couple of views on this problem on the network. Let me tell you this first. Let's say that everyone is in 4G. Let's say that. Of course, it's not true, but let's say that everyone is in 4G LTE. The problem with that is that we are thinking about the bandwidth. And 4G is better than 3G and 2G. But in terms of latency, it's better, but it's 10 times bigger than the latency that we have at home on a cable or DSL connection. And the latency is the time that it takes to get the bytes from the server per TCP packet. So even those 4G lucky users, that today is around 45% of the users worldwide. Even those users, they have a big latency on every TCP packet. So that's the problem. That's why we still have a performance issue. And let me tell you this. So I'm traveling a lot. I've been to 72 countries so far, 72, and different cities. And sometimes I'm in the middle of Silicon Valley. I remember this, having my latest iPhone with a 4G data plan, and I was being downgraded to 2G. So this is still something that happens when you get out of the city. Sometimes you get out of main cities and you are in 3G or 2G. But even in 4G, okay, we need to remember the latency. That's the biggest problems that we have.
So no matter where you are, you can still have a slow connection even if you're in an area that has 4G.
Yeah.
Just a little bit outside of town. Okay. So the solution is PWAs then? Is that sort of seen as the solution from a performance standpoint for some of these issues? Or I guess, let's go this way. What is a PWA? Can you give me a definition? I've heard I know there's various rules that you have to have, but what is it that makes up a PWA, and what is the benefit of a PWA?
Okay, let me give you my definition, because there is no definition. So that's the first thing. There is no real definition of PWA. But a PWA is just a design pattern, like responsive design. It's a design pattern, a set of best practices. In this case, to create web apps that are installable and they can work offline and fast on several operating systems. So it's not that they can act as a normal website inside the browser Chrome, so inside the browser window. And also they can be installed. And after they are installed, they have a first-class experience on that OS, meaning in a standalone Windows on Mac OS, Linux, or Windows, or meaning being an APK, an Android package on Android, or being in a standalone app on iOS. So that's a PWA. So it's a website using new APIs and new solutions from browsers vendors. Will let us install the app and make that app available offline. And after it's installed, it looks like any other app on the system. That's roughly the idea. So it's a design pattern.
So then if it's going to be able to run locally with the idea that it doesn't have an internet connection in offline mode, so that means that it's generally going to have some sort of local data storage?
Yeah, exactly. For that, we have the service worker. So if you have heard about service worker, it's a JavaScript file that we set in our web app. And that service worker will be responsible for caching and serving those files when the user is offline, but also when the user is online. Because maybe we are online, but yeah, we want to be fast. We want to react like a native app. So that's the service worker will serve those files locally. In fact, I usually like to say that the service worker is like a web server that we are installing in the client written in JavaScript. A service worker is mandatory for a PWA, so it's the brain. It's the brain of a PWA. Okay,
so that's a service worker it's purely JavaScript then?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's currently compatible with all the browsers. So it's available, that API is available on the latest version of every major browser. Safari, Edge, Chrome, and Firefox, and Opera.
Okay, so it's in the browser, but if you're running, now I'm confused. So if it's a browser standard, but if you're running natively somewhere, then you don't have a browser.
The browser is always there, even if you don't see the browser. So on a PWA, even when an APK is installed, APK is the Android package on Android. So when you install a PWA on Android, you actually get a native package. But inside that native package, the only thing that is stored is a URL. And Chrome, or the browser you're using, is the one that is going to render your app without the browser UI. So in full screen mode or standalone mode, but this is still the browser.
Okay, so your app is being rendered. So is the rendering handled by the native libraries or the native toolkits for rendering a toolbar or a window, or that's still all the browser? That's where I'm getting confused.
It's all the browser. It's not like React Native or Native-Script. In those cases, you use JavaScript, but then that JavaScript will render on the screen native components from the SDKs, from iOS or Android. A PWA will use just HTML and CSS to render the content on the screen, or SVG or web content in general. You can use WebAssembly if you want, but you cannot access native APIs. So if you want to access the file system, for example, you need to wait for the browser to have support for that API.
Okay, I see. So it's basically you are using the browser in both places, whether you're using that on the browser or on the phone, the browser's running. Okay, that makes a little more sense. So are there any other additional pieces of code or files that you have to have for PWA other than your service worker?
Yeah, you need at least one more file. It's known as the web app manifest. It's just a JSON file that you link into your HTML document. That JSON file will have the metadata for the OS. For example, that includes the app name, the icons, and other metadata that is useful for that OS in particular. It's a standard from the W3C, so it's not OS specific, but the browser will use information from that manifest to actually integrate with the OS when that app is installed. So let me tell you this, that's not the only way that we have to distribute an app, the browser. Today, you can actually distribute officially PWAs on some app stores. For example, Google Play Store. So there is a way that we have, an official way from the Chrome team. You create what I like to call a PWA launcher, and that's a native APK that will not contain your JavaScript or HTML files, will not contain the files, will just contain the URL. Then the user will download the app from the store, like any other app from the store, but then Chrome, an invisible Chrome, because the user is not actually seeing any Chrome user interface, Chrome will take care of downloading the resources, updating the resources when resources are changing server side, and rendering the app on the screen.
Okay, so you provide a URL that has all the resources for your particular application that you have to store somewhere, manage somewhere?
The service worker, that little piece of JavaScript that we write with the PWA will be responsible when you open the app for the first time to cache all the resources that are needed later. That cache is not the normal standard cache that if the user clears the cache will be deleted. So it has a different life cycle. Mm-hmm. You can even request with some JavaScript APIs, you can request a way so the browser will not delete those files. So a way to guarantee that those files will be there no matter what.
Okay, yes, it's a separate cache, so it's not going to get cleaned out automatically and you're going to lose all of your application, right?
Exactly.
So when you're hosting these files, these resources that the service worker is calling, is that something you store like in a GitHub repo somewhere?
It's just HTTP, so wherever you want to store, you just need HTTPS. So
okay,
it's just a standard hosting. You can still use FTP servers if you want.
An Amazon S3 bucket or Dropbox
anywhere,
or whatever.
Just static assets like a normal website. So we are not changing the foundations of how the web works. It's just a website that is using a new API, and when that API is there, then that app can be installed.
Okay. So if I'm loading a PWA onto my computer, onto my desktop, you said the service workers, work in Safari, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and so on and so forth. Which browser is it using for doing all the rendering?
So that's a good question. So the answer is it depends on how are you installing or from where are you installing the app. So to install a PWA today, you have a couple of options. Typically, you're installing a PWA from a browser. That browser is going to be the engine. So if you have two browsers on Android, for example, Firefox and Chrome, and you install the same PWA twice, you cannot do that with Chrome, but let's say you can. You will have two instances of the same PWA using two different browsers. I mean, it's not common on Android that will happen anyway. So the answer is that it will use the engine that you used to install the app.
Okay.
What happens with the store? If you are installing the app from the App Store, in this case, Google Play Store for Android. Let's talk about Android only for now. So in that case, it will use your default browser. I mean, the browser needs to support the new service for PWAs. Chrome is supporting that service, and also Samsung Internet Browser. And Firefox is about to support that pretty soon. So if you are a Firefox user, then you should install apps, PWAs from the store. And by the way, as a user, you don't know if it's a PWA or not. But if you're a Firefox user, then that PWA will use the Firefox engine.
Okay, so it just depends on however you download it then. So going to this scenario where you said maybe you could have two instances of the same PWA on a phone, does that mean they both would have their own local data stores then?
Well, it depends on the engine. on iOS, for example, each instance will have its own separate storage. So for example, Tinder.com, I'm not sure if you know that. I haven't used Tinder, but anyway, you know Tinder.
Yes,
Tinder
I
is
know
a
what it is.
PWA. Okay.
Yes.
Tinder, if you go to Tinder.com, you can actually install it from your iPhone, Android, or desktop computer. And on iOS, so every time you install Tinder, you will have a different instance. And you can have one account per icon because each instance will have its own local storage, cookies, IndexedDB, and even its own storage for the files. On Android, let's say if you use Chrome, you won't be able to install more than one because Chrome is actually creating an APK, an APK cache. It won't let you install another one. But if you use other browsers, you can actually have more than one instance. And in this case, it will use the engine of each browser, but of course, it's not shared with the others. Okay, does it make any sense?
So they're all sandboxed is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. But let me add this because that's important. On Android and desktop, Windows, Mac, Linux, and Chrome OS, when you are installing a PWA with Chrome, the storage of that app is shared with the normal Chrome, which means that if you are already logged in Tinder.com, the website, you are also logged in Tinder.com, the app, because it's the same Chrome engine and it's sharing the storage.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
A few years ago at a JavaScript conference, I was approached by Nader Dabit. And you might know him for the React Native Radio podcast. He's also a developer evangelist for Amazon. And when he came to me, we had a conversation about React Native. And the thing that I love about React Native is that it's approachable, it's web technology, and it's cross-platform. And it makes a lot of things really easy for developers to jump in and do interesting things on mobile with JavaScript. So we've had this show now running for several years, React Native Radio, where we interview people about the React Native ecosystem, some of the things that are coming out in React and how they affect mobile, and other options that you have for mobile development. So if you're doing mobile development, you're doing it in JavaScript, you're looking for a good option, or maybe you're just trying to stay current with React Native, then go check out React Native Radio at reactnativeradio.com.
If I'm writing a PWA, progressive web app, what are the different tools that I can use to do it? For instance, could I use like a Vue, Angular, React framework with something like React Native or some of the native scripts? Is it only for Swift or Objective-C or the tools used for Android? What are the different tools that you can use to write PWA?
Okay, you will definitely use tool chains from the web space, not from the native space. So no Objective-C, no Swift, no React Native. You can use Angular, React, JS, or Vue. In fact, the CLIs from these tools creates PWAs for you if you enable, in the case of Angular, it's a schematic, it's like a plugin. So if you enable a PWA plugin, Angular will create a PWA and the service worker for you. And the same if you just create React app to create React apps. So it's always on the web space. So we're talking about W3C APIs. Everything is done with JavaScript and web technologies and browser engines. So it's on that side. In the case that you want to publish your PWA in the Google Play Store, to create that launcher, you might want to use Android Studio. That's the native SDK for native apps. But also there are some freeware and open source tools on the web that will do that for you. Microsoft has launched PWA Builder, pwabuilder.com, and that website will create that launcher for you. So you don't even need to get into native tools. You just use Visual Studio Code or whatever editor you're using. You publish that on any hosting or cloud-based provider, and that's all you need.
Okay, so it's pretty transparent to create your launcher. So you got all these different tools, but it's definitely web-based. Okay. All right, that makes sense. Anything I'm missing in terms of building PWAs?
I think we covered what you need. So it's a web app and then the service worker, that metadata. We've been talking about publishing the PWA. So you install it from the browser. I think that's the trickiest part today. So in terms of how users will know about the installation, so how users know about PWAs. Today, if you're using Chrome on desktop, maybe you have seen this, maybe not, but sometimes when you're on a website that is actually a PWA, you will see a little install button that appears in the Omnibox. The Omnibox is the URL bar. So in the URL bar, an install icon with a plus sign will appear when you are in a PWA. So that's how the users will know, oh, this website is a PWA, I can actually install it. This is something that is still unknown from a user's point of view. So not every user knows about this and how are you installing a website. So this is something that is getting better with time, with new browsers. Now you can actually create your own install button in your own user interface. So you can have a button somewhere in your URL saying, hey, do you want to install the app? Click here. And that will trigger the installation dialog. This is a tricky part from a marketing point of view because users sometimes don't know about this. Despite that, technologies are pretty mature. So at least for basic app. Now you can use web share, you can use web payments, request payment APIs. So all the web APIs available out there are available on PWAs. So not every app can be a PWA because sometimes you actually need some native SDKs, but a lot of apps can be PWA. So if your app is just consuming web content or web services, which just downloading JSON files from the server and rendering that on the screen, maybe it's a good candidate for a PWA because it's just a website, basically. So if you need to go native with some hardware access, well, then we need to check if the web technologies and web APIs are mature enough for that particular project.
So I want to come back to the local storage real quick. What are the common tools, or is there one over the other that are used for your local storage? Is it just like a local storage in a browser type thing? You're talking like, databases that you can, like MySQLite, for instance, as the one that comes to mind, or what are the options for that?
So for PWA, we are running under the browser umbrella, right? So that means that we can only use APIs available from the browser. So that means that takes SQLite or MySQL out of the equation. So what do we have right now? If we have one storage known as cache storage, that storage is for the actual files of the app. So the resources of the app, the HTML, the CSS, and JavaScript and images. On iOS, we have a limit of 50 megabytes. On all the other platforms, there is no limits. So you can actually install as many space as you want from the storage. Then we have the data storage. So the actual data that the user is generating or downloading from web services. In that case, we can use IndexedDB, that is a NoSQL database, well known in the web space today, or local storage that is for more simple key value storage that is very limited in space. So we have one storage for the actual app and another storage for the data.
Are the limitations the same for the data storage as for the app storage in terms of 50 megs on iOS? It's
similar. So you have another 50 megs on IndexedDB for iOS. In terms of, let's say, Android, Chrome base, typically you can request more space with user permission. And right now, it's a percentage of your available space. So if you have a device with no space, no available space in the memory, or a computer with no space in the hard drive, maybe the space that you have will be just 2 megs or something like that. If you have enough space, it's pretty unlimited, to be honest, today. It sounds scary that every website can store as much as they want, but that's basically how it works today.
Are you able to access like an SD card that's in a mobile device, or is it strictly the internal storage that's on the phone itself?
So today, it's an agnostic API. So you just store somewhere. You don't know where. It's up to the browser. So it's a sandbox. So you don't know exactly the real file system. Chrome is working on a new API it's called the Native File System API. It's currently in beta. So they're testing that, and it will come in the next 1 or 2 versions of Chrome, only on the Chrome side. And with user permission, you can actually access the real file system. So you can actually create a text editor or Visual Studio Code that is basically JavaScript. It can be directly a website or a PWA. You don't actually need a native wrapper with that API. That's coming. It's not exactly today. So the storages that you have available are storages that are agnostic from the real file system. You just store somewhere. You have an API. You store, you retrieve, but you don't know exactly from where.
Which is the point of an API in the first place, right?
Yeah,
you just give it what you need, and it handles everything behind the scenes. So
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just curious, since you've been doing this for a while, can you give us some examples of PWAs that you worked on, just in a generic sense in terms of functionalities, maybe that are sort of cool or unique?
Well, in terms of functionality, I've been working on PWAs for games, for apps that are taking QR codes, apps that are, for example, so when you order a pizza or something like that, you have maybe a small pizza place that you have in town, you don't need a native app and hire a Java developer or a Kotlin developer for Android or a Swift developer on iOS, but you want to have an order app. Well, maybe PWA is just web, so it's simple to maintain for small businesses. That's one example. But I've been working for a lot of, I've been consulting for a lot of big companies doing PWAs. And today, there are big names doing PWAs like Google Maps, Twitter, Tinder, as I mentioned before. A lot of newspapers are also having PWAs. I remember one that is in the store. It's 1-800-Flowers in the US.
Yes.
1-800-Flowers. They used to have a native app on the Google Play Store. And they replaced that with a React-based PWA in the store. So if you go now to the store and download that app, you will actually see a PWA. You don't know that as a user, just an app. But it's the same code base, because it's not the same code base. It's actually the same URL that the one that when you go to the website. That's a big advantage.
Oh, yeah. So, right, once used multiple places. I could see, definitely use. So another way that I know that you can, write web apps and use them on computers or so on is something like Electron. Mm-hmm. Slack, is the classic example that's written in Electron. Have you ever compared like performance or any of the characteristics between the two?
Most of the time, as a general rule, PWAs will run faster. Why? Because you're not actually shipping a Chrome engine. With Electron, you're actually shipping a Chrome engine and also a Node engine. That means that when you have a PWA, you're actually going to use the engine that you have installed in your browser. That is being evolved with time. So Chrome, every couple of weeks, you get a new version. So your PWA will always use the latest version of the engine. So that's why it's typically faster. But compared with Electron, I think Electron might disappear in the future if we have a lot of new APIs coming to the web. And Chrome is working on that with something known as Project Fugu. Project Fugu is the project that they're trying to bring all the APIs from the native world to the web. So then we don't need Electron or PhoneGap anymore. So we don't need to wrap web into a native container that might have security issues because you are not in control of the engine. Today, Electron is still needed for some reasons because sometimes you need to actually execute native code, for example, for accessing the file system. So that's why now they are creating new APIs. But yeah, that's Chrome. On the iOS world or Mac world, things are moving slower. So yeah, you can install PWAs, but they're not adding so many APIs. They are usually on Twitter. The WebKit guys, they tend to be more, how can I say this? They should be more critical, saying like, we don't want to push too hard on APIs. We want to be more private. We want to be more, let's say, slower. They want to be slower in terms of implementation of APIs. So we have like kind of a race here between Chrome and Safari. Chrome is trying to push the limits of the browser a lot, and Apple is trying to play safe. So at that point, it depends on the platform that you want to target.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Pretty consistent with what we tend to see from Apple anyway. Okay, anything else you want to cover that I have failed to bring up?
No, I think the best way to try PWAs is to test one. Just go with your browser to one of the PWAs. There is a place, it's AppScope, just Google AppScope, a guide of PWAs available. So you just go and install one so you can actually experience that a lot. That's the best way to experience a PWA. Just use your iPhone, add to the home screen a PWA, use your Android, and try one so you can actually experience how it looks like and what you can do with it.
Okay, so yeah, here's AppScope, appsco.pe.
Yeah,
okay.
The URL, it's actually AppScope, so they're using .pe as the domain.
Right, exactly. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so noticing here that you've got quite a number of books, especially it looks like you write a lot for O'Reilly.
Yeah.
High performance mobile web, programming for the mobile web, web mobile. So which one's your most current?
The last one is free, so it's available for free on my website. It's Hacking Web Performance. And the previous one is High Performance Mobile Web. So my books, the latest books were more targeting on web performance for mobile devices.
Hacking Mobile Web. Okay, yeah. So your site is firt.mobi.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, cool. So we'll put that in the show notes for sure. And then it looks like they can see links to all your articles and books and other stuff. Well, great. Thanks. I've learned a lot.
Okay,
Talking
great.
about PWAs and mobile apps. I've been pretty desktop focused, so it's good to learn more about the mobile apps.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just launched my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's up on Amazon. We self-published it. I would love your support. If you want to go check it out, you can find it there, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. Have a good one. Max out.
So now let's go into picks. Are you aware of picks or what we do for picks? Just anything that you want to talk about that you think is cool, whether it's technical or non-technical, a movie, a book, a tool, something that's been really useful or interesting to you lately?
Let me think about that.
While you think, I'm going to go ahead and do mine real quick. My pick for today is an oldie but a goodie, and it's called The Club. And the club is basically a thing you can put on your car steering wheel, sort of deter thieves from it. And it's a particular interest to me because I bought my kids a car a couple years ago, and it's a 2000 Honda Civic. And here in the U.S., those cars made around then were very easy to steal because of the keys, and they're just really poor security. It's easy to break in. So last December, my daughter had it stolen from work, and we found it a couple days later. Some guy was just living in it. And then last week, my son's been driving it, and it got stolen from in front of our house in the middle of the night. And we just found it last night and got it back. In both cases, they forgot to put the club on. Every other day we've had the club on there, and people say, oh, it really doesn't work. Professional thieves can get past it. And that may be true, but for the casual thief, it's going to stop them. But in both cases, the one times that they didn't put the club on is when it got stolen. When the club's on there, it never have any problems, even for a car like that. So there's a few different versions of the club out now. It's you can get red and yellow versions and 2 hooks and 1 hook and so on. But my son, in this case, he put it on but didn't lock it, which really didn't make it very useful. So I got him a club now that auto locks. So when you put it on the steering wheel and you spread it apart, it automatically locks, and you don't, and then you have to use the key to unlock it. So that's my vote for the club. It's certainly never had a car stolen when the club has been on it and properly locked. So Max, what's your pick? You got any?
I think I will go back to the PWAs. So I will not talk about cars. I'll go back to PWAs. So something I've been trying, going back to the PWA thing, it's a new tool from Google known as Llama. So LLAMA. It's a CLI that it's on GitHub. It's open source that will create a PWA launcher for you. So you have a PWA or a website, and that CLI will create an Android project that will actually be ready for the Play Store. So you don't need to know anything about Android development. It's like a shortcut to the PWA. It's only 1 month old or something like that. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at it's on NPM.
Yes, it's on NPM.
Chaos Llama.
Oh, maybe it's not that one.
Oh, no, it's not. That's for AWS. Let me find another one here. Okay, we'll find it and put it in the show notes. But awesome. So is that your only pick?
It's Llamapack. Yeah, Llamapack. That's the name. I'm pasting the URL right now.
Okay, awesome. We will put that in the show notes. All right. Well, thank you very much, Max. Very good to hear from you from down in Buenos Aires. Oh, where can people get a hold of you if they want a hold of you, whether it's Twitter or GitHub, or what's the basic place to get a hold of you?
Typically Twitter. I'm Firt, F-I-R-T on Twitter. So 4 letters. That's a simple username. The same as this was Firtman is my last name, so it's the first 4 letters of my last name, F-I-R-T.
F-I-R-T on Twitter. All right. Well, thank you, Max, and we will see you around the internet.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Steve.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.